who is also our chairperson, Professor Vivek Kumar, who is going to inaugurate this year's weekly seminar series, and he has agreed to speak on Subaltern Perspective in Social Sciences, philosophical and theoretical rationale. So I do not want to introduce him to you again. So he is well known and you all know him. So without any further delay, I would request him to speak for 45 minutes, and then we can have some detailed discussion for at least half an hour. I request Professor Harish Narayan Das to chair the session officially. We'll have a chair who will later on moderate the discussion. Thank you, Professor Vivek Kumar. Thank you.
Over to you.
You just say it.
Thank you so much, Srinivas and Ashish, for giving me this opportunity to speak today. And it's really a very, very emotional moment for me also, because, you know, since I took over as chairperson, the whole system was topsy-turvy, and we could not have a in-person dialogue like this. We were having, you know, online discussions, and in between actually what happened, a very, very historical moment also lapsed, and that was CSSS Act 50. We celebrated, without celebrating, CSSS Act 50, you know, the golden jubilee of our department. So let's clap at least for today that we are at 50. So I think, you know, it may be considered as a curtain raiser for the 50-year celebration, and we will definitely have it before I relinquish with my office. We'll definitely have a program on this. 50 years of Center for the Study of Social Systems, or CSSS Act 50. So actually, you know, today's lecture, Subaltern Perspective in Social Sciences, is a part of my upcoming book, and and it has evolved over the years. So therefore, let me at the outset thank the students of methodology of social sciences, those who have really been my victim, and those who have really accepted and those who have sat down, discussed and asked very perplexing questions, and actually through that this whole aspect has evolved. So to begin with, as I always do, I begin with the term subaltern perspective, and I have borrowed this term subalterns from Antonio Gramsci. However, Gramsci used the term for understanding the condition of the poor, the lower classes and the peasantry during the Mussolini Italy. And then he tried to compare it with Indian situation itself. Later on, the subalterns term was popularized by Subaltern Studies Collective. And this is a group of educated, I'm calling educated Marxist historians based in India, Britain and US. And these historians were concerned with retrieve the history of the peasants, and especially peasants' insurgency before, during and after the British colonial rule in India. Now, the later on, you know, this term was again critically analyzed by Spivak, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, and she tries to critically analyze the term and argues that Subaltern Studies Collective they have tried to follow this, and there has been political achievement, no doubt, but the methodology of the Subaltern Studies Collective prevents them from reading the history of women resistance. Women resistance was not at all accepted then. And therefore he tries, or she tries, to revive the history or retrieve the women's resistance through fiction, especially fiction of tribal women. And therefore, friends, again, a big chunk of the population, starting from Subalterns Collective in Britain, or led by Ranjit Guha, 10 volumes, as you all know, but I don't find the articles related to ex-untouchables of the Indian society. And similarly, when we see and we come to Gayatri Chakravarti's Spivak, we also see that she is also restricting herself to the tribal, and that to fiction of the tribal. But the best part is that her reading of the fiction is, intervened by, we call it as a deconstruction of Derrida. And she is trying to argue that, look, we have to, come this side, come. You have to turn your face a little bit. So she actually is trying to read the history and retrieve the history, and in that context, I think this term becomes very important. If you really want to understand Indian society, then there has to be a different vantage point also for using the term. And therefore, I use this term, drawing from Durkheim's essentialism. I'm taking essentialism of Durkheim. As you all know, in Rules of Sociological Method, he writes that, okay, physics cannot see heat, but it studies it. How? The essence of rise of mercury in the thermometer. So I can also understand the subalterns from the different characteristics in the Indian society. And second, I also draw from Dilthey, who talks about that, yes, you can understand the internality of the individual by outside expressions. And I locate Dilthey along with Weber, who is talking about social action. So club with these aspects that you can understand the internality of the individual by outward expressions of the social action, we can relive the actions itself, and that's the way we can understand. So I draw characteristics of the population on the basis of essentialism, on the basis of internality and social action. On the three bases, I draw 6 characteristics of the population, to which I will call as subaltern. One is their unique structural location in the Hindu social order. What is the structural location? As a sociologist, we have to go to the structure, and of course we can restrict ourselves. The structural location, and on the basis of the structural location, there is cumulative exclusion. Cumulative exclusion is the second characteristic, and the third characteristic, millennium-old cumulative exclusion. Because time is very important, history is very important. Usually we debunk and we try to actually forget the time lag, because time becomes very, very important as far as the noting down the facts are concerned. Because facts are, as Durkheim says, facts are located, or they are meaningful only in time and context. So without actually having time and context, you cannot say that this millennium-old exclusion has to be factored in. And fourth element is that this is unalterable identity. Once a subaltern in this, even if you gain economic, political, social, educational, religious mobility, you remain so. So there is unalterable. And this brings me to the fifth and that is unique construction of consciousness. Because of these four characteristics, there is a unique construction of consciousness, and out of which the sixth element is produced, and that is evolution of unique cultural symbols, and also not only cultural symbols but icons, and also the celebrations which they have. And this all, they try to retrieve their history. So this consciousness is there to retrieve their history and deconstruct and reconstruct a reality. So having said this, I come to that one of the very important aspect was that there is basically a rationale for using the term subaltern, because it doesn't come with the connotation of caste, it doesn't come with the connotation of history of deprivation, it is not coming also, with the history of stigma or other things. So we are trying to evolve an independent term. Now, apart from giving this limitation of the use of the term of subalterns, in social sciences, I also want to highlight that the social scientists, they have undermined the capability, capacity and creativity of the subalterns. And that's actually, I am reminded of one of the quotes from Gopal Guru. And Gopal Guru writes in 2002, how egalitarian are Indian social sciences, and he writes, certain groups, and I am quoting, certain groups who did not form the part of organic labor failed to develop intellectual capacity to reflect. Very painful and very difficult to understand that a journal which is established as economic and political weekly can publish these lines that people do not have sense of reflexivity. I do not know whether it is political or it is scientific. It's up to you. The second part is even more obnoxious. What he tries to argue, occupations, they were involved in occupation that were devoid of the possibility of innovation and imagination, and hence any possibility of knowledge. Now, any insane person, I should not use the adjective, but I really feel to use that adjective, can this insane or irrational world can publish this type of lines for any community, for any population. But this has been published in India, and that too in economic and political weekly. And therefore, friends, it is therefore very, very important to understand the ontology of the group subalterns itself, because the whole para tries to deconstruct the ontological reality, the being of the Dalits itself. And therefore, it is very important for us to engage. If that is not only, if that is not the only thing, the subalterns, as people were trying to retrieve the history, what has happened further? With this notion that they did not have any capacity to produce reflexivity, this was practically accepted by one of the media personalities, and he wrote a book called Worshipping the False God. And there, Arun Shourie wrote, what did he write? Oh, Ambedkar was not the chief architect of the constitution, he was a draftsman. Okay, he was a draftsman. That means again, you are belittling the creativity and capacity and capability. I don't have to go into the details. If you want to ask what was the contribution of Ambedkar in the making of the constitution, I have another paper I can definitely give you. But one of the very important aspects is there were 7 members, and out of 7, 6 were outside. They were declared invalid, they did not actually come, and this was actually given by his colleagues in the parliamentary forum itself. So, if this is the case, then what about the, if this was the media, then what about the sociologists? I'm reminded of Gutierrez's book, Caste and Race in India, where he does not figure, he does not take reference. And Gutierrez's book is published in 1936, and after that there were a very number of reprints of the same book. Ambedkar's article on caste, genesis and mechanism was published in Antiquary, and that was a foreign journal in America in 1970. And yet he did not, the most important aspect that they were both in Mumbai. They were working in Mumbai, and even then actually there is erasure. If that is not all, what about historians? Historians, and I am reminded of Bipin Chandra, 600-page book, India's Struggle for Independence, with 7 reprints, doesn't give an independent space to Ambedkar at all. And he is referred 3 times with reference to Gandhi and 1 to Jinnah. There is no independent space for Ambedkar, as if that he was not an independent leader, even of a faction. So what? Actually, he was negotiating in Round Table Conference. That's a different thing. And similarly, no space is given to Periyar in this history book, where vacuum satyagraha was led by Periyar, and after Periyar was booked, his wife and sister led that movement. But the whole book is silent on that whole episode, which has been published by Periyar himself in his collection of papers, that is The Revolt. If you want, you can read it. Now, if that is the aspect of the erasers, then one of the very important erasure is the Utopia of Ravidads. What is the Utopia of Ravidads? It is Begumpura. Now, Marxist classless society as a utopia can be accepted. Gandhi's Ramraj can be accepted. But why Ravidas's Utopia of Begumpura is not accepted? Is it an eraser or is it a deliberate attempt? And therefore, friends, it is very important for us that we have to look into the erasers. And erasers can be only tackled through the subaltern's perspective that I'm going to come a bit later. If that is actually eraser, there is distortion also. There is also distortion. One is, of course, actually undermining the capacity, capability, creativity. There are erasers and there are distortions as well. And what are the distortions? One of the examples which I want to give is the critical analysis of the institutions. Critical analysis of the institutions. And there are a number of examples, but one of the examples which I want to give, that is caste is a colonial construct. The way actually a historian comes and writes a book on purposive sampling without any rational, and I can quote from him, he says that I will trace the history of caste from South India and medieval ages. And there is no rationale. Can you have a topic without rationale? Why will you choose only from South India? And why will you choose only from medieval ages? As if caste was not there in ancient India? As if the caste was not in North India or the Central India? So why this purposive sampling? And then this purposive sampling is generalized. We as social scientists, we keep on teaching, and the way you should also come in actually, you see, techniques, this is taught that if the sampling is purposive, you cannot generalize. How this generalization is taking place? Nobody questions. And then, if that is what is the methodology, that is nature and scope, I'm talking about time, I'm talking about the area, what is epistemology? The source and foundation of the knowledge. What does he say? I will trace the history of caste from medieval ages, and that too from South India, from the colonial archives. From the colonial archives, from the diaries of the Jesuit priests, and third, from the administrators' diaries as well. So again, all the three have a particular, nature of source and foundation. and that nature is colonial, then what will happen? You will get the result which you desire. And that's why caste becomes colonial construct. He is also not arguing, when did the term caste come to India? You all know, caste came only in 14th century. India has a larger history. This caste term, when it gets, popularized, and then he also argues that, look, it is because of the census. So when did the first census took place? At all India level I'm talking about. He himself gives the data that was 1911 was the first census which occurred at the all India level. Otherwise, it was very localized phenomena. But it could never happen. So and then from 1911 to 1931, the census stops at 1931. That means there were only 20 years of census, okay, at all India level. But 80 years we did not have the caste census. If 20 years there was reification of the caste, why there has not been deconstruction of the caste in 80 years? If the caste was only colonial construct. And therefore, friends, I think we need a different perspective to understand this distortion of the reality. And again, you can go to my other paper. I have given the example of Sanskritization, that how did he starts with the other type of, because he is only, Srinivas is only quoting one-sided aspect of it, that there has been only one type of process, that is the lower strata imitate the lifestyle of the others. As if the culture is pristine and pure form of the reality. Culture cannot be pristine and pure form of the reality. Then how can only one side can actually, imitate the other side's reality? Culture is mixed, and we all know. We all know that how Romila Thapar says that how actually tribal gods are mixed within the Hindu social order. And Jagannath Puri is one of the better examples given by her. Second, that how the Sanskritization as a process, Emile Du Bois talks about that, and even Ambedkar talks about that, how if Brahman passed the areas of the Dalit Basti, they were beaten. They cannot pass. And there is an omen also within the Dalit society that if you can see the Brahmin face, that something bad is going to happen. So there are actually examples from both the sides, imitating and actually, defending. Just actually giving the culture aside. So there are distortions, but that is not my, rationale. The only thing is that I'm trying to argue that there are actually, there are basically undermining the creativity and capability of the population. There is actually reductionism, there is erasers, there are also, what is the last point? Distortions, and also reductionism, last actually. And reductionism, I am reminded of a book recently published by Ram Narayan Rawat and Ram Narayan Rawat and Satyanarayan. And this is the book on Dalit Studies. This is the name of the book, is Dalit Studies. And very promptly, what they do, they argue that, in 1990s, the new Dalit movement has forced a detailed consideration of theoretical and political issues. So 1990 is the marker. That is the departing point for this study, that before that there was no consciousness among Dalits. They were not producing any type of knowledge. And it is only in 1990s that the whole production of knowledge has changed, and they have entered into the university. A new type of discussion and debate has started. And to legitimize this statement, they have quoted Partha Chatterjee. Of course, Partha Chatterjee, without that, actually, how can Indian academia be fulfilled. So what does Partha Chatterjee says, and I quote, 1989 and 90 marks the rise of autonomous Dalit politics. Now actually it's very easy for me as a student of Dalit politics. I can see that Dalit politics started in 1919 itself, when Ambedkar started asserting their independent Dalit rights. And in 1936 he formed the Independent Labour Party, in 1942 Scheduled Caste Federation, 1956 Republican Party of India, 1972 Dalit Panthers. Independent Dalit politics has been there. But I don't know from where this fact actually, that reducing the whole assertion of the Dalits is basically to 1989 and 90. I don't know actually from where it comes. And then what happens, he also draws this legitimacy from Rajani Kothari, and Rajani Kothari also endorses the same point that 1990 refers to the recognition of the entry of these people. Now, if these four aspects, one is actually last reducing the whole consciousness to a particular juncture. Why? What is the rationale? But the book is not at all. And then they say that this book is from different perspective. Now my problem is that what is that perspective? What is the rationale of that perspective? What is the composition of that perspective? What are the functions of that perspective? Nothing is actually described in the book. So my whole issue is simple, that this is a process of reductionism. Now, if that is the case, in these circumstances, then there is a simple question which I try to raise, that in these circumstances one is forced to argue that there is a urgency and legitimacy for a new perspective, for understanding the reality of the Indian society. So I'm trying to argue for a new perspective that will have its own subject matter, it will have its nature and scope, it will also have its methodology and also its function. Without all the four, you cannot have a perspective and leading to a studies. So subaltern studies can actually, what we have done in UK, or the subaltern's perspective or subaltern's school or historiography, what has done, I think we need to go beyond that. Okay? Now, having said this, so what is my rationale actually? What is my rationale for this? And I have divided this rationale into three. One is the rationale which is philosophical. The second rationale is theoretical. And third, actually, I'm talking about a little bit of criticality. So I draw, philosophical rationale. How much time was left? So, so friends, actually I draw the philosophical rationale. Why actually I am drawing philosophical rationale first? Because the philosophy of the existing social sciences, I begin with Gopal Guru, who says that people did not have reflexivity. I also draw that actually they were not the producers of knowledge. I am drawing that from there. And therefore I draw from René Descartes. And René Descartes very simply argues that I think, therefore I am. So subalterns also think. Subalterns also think. And further, Descartes goes on to argue that the division of good reason and bad reason is endowed in the individual by nature. By nature itself endows individuals to divide what is good reason and bad reason. if nature has endowed so much to the individual that they can think and they can differentiate between good reason and bad reason, then who am I to say that they did not have reflexivity? And even then people are saying, they have velocity to say, and they are established as a great philosophers. So I think we need to understand their premise critically. The second, actually, I also draw philosophical aspect from Durkheim's Rules of Sociological Method, and he says that for social existence, individual needs a conceptualization. Without conceptualization of social and natural reality, individuals cannot survive. You have to have a conceptualization of nature, and that's why people lived beside the river. They did not go and jump in the river because they conceptualized nature. They conceptualized nature, what to eat and what not to eat, and in the night where they have to live. All this conceptualization was sine qua non for their existence. And similarly, actually, they also had social conceptualization. Relationships, how actually they had this relationship. So this conceptualization, it's not that the subalterns did not have this conceptualization. You did not find actually incest taboo there. They also had their mother, brothers, sisters, and their family, which they reared, and they survived also. So how can you argue that, look, they did not have any, knowledge or reflexivity? Last but not the least, all my MA students must be knowing about Kant and how Kant tries to argue that realities are constituted through not only empiricism but rationalism. So by confluence of rationalism and empiricism, realities come. How many? You don't want? Anyone? You don't want? Huh? You don't want? Okay. So, friends, actually Kant is arguing that realities are not only constituted through empiricism, but rationalism clubbed together. So this confluence, reconciliation between empiricism and rationalization. So I think this is actually there with the subalterns, and therefore one philosophical rationale for constructing subaltern perspective comes from the philosophical perspective. The second actually set I've taken from theoretical perspective, and all you know, I'm fond of C. Wright Mills, who talks about biography, history, and their interaction in society are three coordinates on the basis of which sociological imagination takes place. Now, if biography is so important, and it is not he only saying, also, I think Professor Abid Sharma may not like it, but sociology of knowledge also tries to give it with Peter Bourdieu and Luckman. Peter Bourdieu and Luckman are trying to argue that sociology is related to the social reality in which it arises. Social reality in which it arises. So, ambience in which social realities arise. And the second part is, it is related to existential determination of thought. So thoughts, the location of the researcher, the producer of knowledge, is very important in the society, out of which, location creates the consciousness. And this, the third actually adds to it, Bourdieu. Bourdieu is talking about the cultural capital. So, it is important for us that how the production of knowledge in the society is very much related to biography of the individuals. And that biography not only has imagination, but also creates consciousness. Consciousness. And consciousness comes out of cultural capital. Some people are devoid of cultural capital, and some people are having accumulation of cultural capital. This I have been arguing for many years together, and I've written it also. So this actually this rationing, if you bring this trio, C. Wright Mills, Berger, and actually P. Bourdieu, in the Indian society, then you can see the hierarchical nature of the society. Those who are of the upper echelons, they have actually accumulation of cultural capital, their cultural capital, and some people are actually devoid of the mainstream cultural capital. They have their own culture. It's not that I'm saying that they are devoid of their culture. They have their own actually culture. So their production of knowledge, their construction of consciousness is totally different. And now, therefore, these three have a very, very important theoretical basis for subaltern's perspective, because their biography defines their imagination. Their biography defines the production of knowledge based on their cultural capital. And therefore, if you can, actually I've made a list of 25 biography and Dalit autobiographies. 25. And actually these autobiographies, I think only people know about Jutan. Some people may know also about Murdaiya. Some people may go a little bit other to Mera Bachpan Mere Kandho Par. But there are actually, I have made list here for presentation 25. Out of them, 6 are women also, Dalit women. And biography, Viramma, I think you most of you have read. Now, these biographies are representative of the production of knowledge out of their construction of consciousness, which have emerged out of their deprivation. And that is why Jutan becomes important. Now, you have to understand the sociology of Jutan. Because Jutan, a term is not from English word, and leftover will not be explained actually, the sociology of Jutan. Leftover is very, very simple term, which is English translation of Jutan. It does not have that contempt associated with leftover. The contempt and stigma attached to the leftover is not captured by the term leftover, and therefore we need to engage with it. The second is Murdaiya. Now Murdaiya is, I have not read actually neither Bete nor Aman Srinivas nor even Professor Weissing or Uman. They did not find this space in the village. And village studies has been one of the important studies in Indian sociology. Why they did not find this space? That means, I think, somewhere their incommensurability or their engagement is totally different altogether. Or the institutions which have been studied by these people. One of the institutions I would like to mention is Guru, the teacher. What has happened? All the people. Guru is considered to be emancipator. But their gurus is total deconstruction of the established image of the guru in the Indian society. I think we have to engage that. Why the gurus have treated these people like that. So where is that cultural capital? And that is why I think Bourdieu is very correct that the functionalist school of education, the functionalist school of education doesn't tell you the reality of the education. Functionalist school of education will tell that education is emancipatory. It emancipates everyone. But functionalist school will never tell us reproduction of hegemony. Reproduction of hegemony in the curriculum content itself, in the pedagogy. So therefore, friends, I think if we are really talking about a perspective, then the curriculum content itself becomes a part of the perspective. Okay. Now I come to the third actually rationale, and that I have taken a little bit from critical aspect, and that I begin with Lyotard, and Lyotard is talking about postmodern conditions. postmodern condition. Now here actually I just want to refer to two meta-narratives which he is questioning. Lyotard questions two meta-narratives of the modernity. One is modernity, that modernity is emancipatory. Modernity is emancipatory, and another meta-narrative is science. Science is also, or science knows everything. These are two meta-narratives which have been deconstructed or questioned by Lyotard in his book, actually Postmodern Condition. Now he says that if modernity was so much emancipatory, then what happened of Holocaust? What happened actually in Russia? Gulag? What happened the Second World War? Was it emancipatory? Or was it actually something else? So that, consciousness or that validity of meta-narrative has been totally deconstructed or is in big question. Okay? Now, the second meta-narrative, that science knows all and be all and all actually. Science is very dovetailed. Now he takes example of three people. One, of course, you all know is Thomas Kuhn. Another is Freire. And third, he takes Luckman. All these people are talking about there is so much of unscientific within science. And especially I am reminded of Thomas Kuhn. Two very important examples. One is actually biography of Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin is saying, I've written such a good book. It's fantastic, but nobody is accepting it. Why actually, if science is so good, so objective, so dovetailed, why his book was not accepted by the other fellow beings? That means there was something unscientific. And then his teacher says that, look, there are two reasons that your books are not being accepted. One is people are doing their work, they have a very different generalization, they have their specialization, and therefore they are not accepting your book. But the second reason is more important, that if they accept your theory, what will happen to their theory? So this is actually, the way I see it actually, when I am not quoted, now I feel very relaxed. No problem. If Darwin was not accepted, then who the Vivek Kumar is? So you can very well understand what scientificity we are talking about. And then the second example he gives of Max Planck. Max Planck actually talks about, Planck's theory, which was of course a very, very important theory because Newtonian physics was talking about linearity, certainty, Einsteinian physics was talking about relativity, but here was a very total different altogether. And he questioned that, look, you are not able to understand the internality of the atom itself. The classical science was not able to understand the internality. So how can you understand the human beings? So therefore actually he brought this theory that, how to understand the internality of the atom. But he was not being accepted. So what did he say? He said that it's good that actually there are older generation and they will die, and then the young generation who works in that area, that will accept me very easily. That was the solution he gave. Now if that is the science, what Freire says, Freire argues that, look, reality is multi-angular, reality is edgy, it is so colossal, it is so gigantic. And how can a small method, don't take it, word by word, and you say tomorrow, sir, I will not study method at all, because Freire has said that. So he says that how? Why actually you are not accepting this? That a simple method can understand this colossal, gigantic multi-angular and also historicist reality? How can you understand it? You cannot, and therefore you need actually wider reading and wider engagement. The other part is that how these people teach you science, the objectivity. They dissociate metaphysics from physics, and then they control your body language. You can't even smile, you can't even actually laugh, and you have to be only observing the phenomena which is actually unnatural or natural phenomena and observe the reality. That is the way they reduce the whole persona of the individual. So can you really make it? Now, if this is the way actually the science is working, then why are we so much engaged and dependent on this scientific reality? And that is also social science, because social science is drawn from science. Okay, so that stretches to social science. So therefore, friends, I argue that even in social scientific reality, the reality is only partial or it is distorted, and therefore we need a different perspective to look into. The second aspect, of course, is actually Thomas Kuhn's paradigm, that if one paradigm or researches are not only made by collection of data, and I'm really very happy when I was reading actually this aspect, I read Romila Thapar using Thomas Kuhn. And Romila Thapar argues that, look, what Thomas Kuhn is saying, Thomas Kuhn is arguing that researches are not only made by data collection, they are also made by changing the paradigm. If you change the paradigm, your whole data will start actually changing. So you have to look into that, how till now what paradigm the collection of data has taken place. And that's why when I was writing my paper, How Egalitarian is Indian Sociology, I argued of the locale from which the data is collected. I quoted Andre Bete, I quoted Evan Srinivas, I quoted Madan, that from where did they collect their data? And their collection of data, therefore, whether it had the total reality of the society or not. So changing of the paradigm is another rationale, critical rationale. And last but not the least, Paulo Freire. Pedagogy of the oppressed will be written by the oppressed. Oppressor will not write an emancipatory agenda. Oppressor will not write an emancipatory agenda. The oppressed knows very well what are the institutions in which and where are the glitches in which he is. And if he can actually extract that, then he will become like one, and therefore he will be able to discern the elements that where the exploitation is. Now this pedagogy of the oppressed will emancipate the oppressor also, and therefore we need it. Now these are, three rationales for criticality, and three theoretical and three philosophical. But world over, this tendency I have noted in my classes, actually methodology of social sciences, I taught that how world over 8 types of sociologies have been visible. Starting from, each nation has its own reality, and therefore actually they produce a very different type of knowledge system. Starting from actually, I've taken this Raymond Aron, that how positivism dominated in the beginning, at the initial period, how positivism dominated in French society, humanism in German society, and then actually we go into understanding how Marxism in Russia and how reformism in US, and then come to Japanese sociology, and how Japanese sociology rejected all the Western philosophies and Western theories, and then started their own raw empiricism to understand their reality. And you can read Yamagishi and Brinton. that also gives. Even if you go to African society, even African society, there we have found that how historical anthropology became the basis for their production of knowledge. David Brindle, African sociology. And in India, we do not know actually how Indology was replaced by functionalism and then clubbing to the Western philosophy as well. So, the point is that even in America, there actually Gordon Morgan was talking about that how we have to get rid of the European concepts. European concepts are brought in American sociology, and European concept, one of the example he gives of the European concept was feudalism. And then when we trace the history of feudalism from, actually it goes to Greece and then Rome. How long the history is, but that is being pasted on American society, which is only having 400 or 500 years old history. How can you actually understand American society from these concepts? That is the worry of the Morgan. And therefore my worry is that how can we really understand the Indian society with these accepted actually anomalies which are there in different perspectives. And therefore we need a subaltern perspective leading to composition, nature, scope, and thereby a study. Thank you.